Hello, I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. With breeding season on the way for many flocks, we catch up with sheep specialist Damian Costello to discuss the whole topic of mating management. We start off with Damian outlining the final checks that should be conducted on a breeding flock and rams in particular. We delve into the ram management in a bit more detail, and he really emphasised the importance of addressing any issues that can cause infertility in a timely manner. Following on from that, we discussed the benefits of raddling, the different options available, and the correct application procedure. We also discussed the topic of single sire mating versus group mating, rotating rams between groups, and ewe to ram ratio, and a number of practical steps that can be employed on farms to guard against an infertile ram, or at least the risk of one. Damian offers his tips on joining your rams and choice of ram for that task. And we finish up with Damian summarising his key tips for management during the mating period. However, we start off with Damian outlining those necessary steps you need to take and checks you need to have in place before joining rams and ewes.
Yeah, sure. I suppose people are at the start of mating, or some people have already turned out the rams, Ciarán, at this stage. To carry out any routine treatments that you need to carry out before ram turnout, so that you can ensure that there's minimal flock disturbance during the actual mating period itself. So, if you're doing any fluke treatment, foot bathing, all that kind of thing, particularly looking at the likes of lameness, try and have lameness under control before the start of mating. And again, it's important that you monitor it during the mating. It's probably no harm to have a spare ram or two around the place, in case that there's any lameness issue with the ram or any other reason that a ram may break down during the mating time, so that you have a substitute to put in if the ram you've let out is unable to function.
They do tend to get 11 months with no issues, and then on the point of mating, they can come up with a
well,
few.
that can be often the case, yeah.
Just like in terms of the ewes, Damian, look at the target of 3.5 at mating's been put out before. But just is there anything in this period we need to look out for when the ram is with them?
Yeah, I suppose. Look, we've often heard that we want ewes on a rising plane of nutrition in the lead up to mating, and I think it's very important to maintain this during the breeding season. And we're at a time of the year, Ciarán, I suppose, where we're talking about grazing out paddocks and closing them up for the winter. But it's important that your breeding ewes don't force them too hard in terms of grazing out paddocks, and certainly don't let them run out of grass. I suppose if you had the likes of a dry ewe lamb group that weren't being mated this year, they could be used as the group that would clean out the paddocks after the ewes.
Just like that's a bit of a balancing act at this stage of the year. The big group probably is the ewes. Any tips maybe on getting that clean out a bit quicker with them, or how do you kind of get the both tasks done?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and a lot of people will maybe use temporary divisions with a couple of reels or something like that in order to get them in and out quick. And you're not putting them under, you're not forcing them to graze small, short grass for long periods. So those kind of things. But it's important, I think, to bear in mind that you're not ewes that you're probably in the early days of pregnancy or in the early stages of pregnancy, that you're not forcing them in terms of getting them to graze out paddocks too hard or letting them almost run out of grass.
A bit of a balancing act there. Look, in terms of the rams, obviously they need to be in good condition coming into tipping. What would you suggest for them?
Again, people should have been building, I suppose, ram body condition. You'd be hoping that there'd be 3.5 to 4 body condition at turnout. There's two main reasons for this, I suppose. One is they will eat very little during the mating season because their main interest, I suppose, is seeking out ewes to mate, and they can lose up to 20% of their body weight during the breeding season. And the second part of this is if you have thin rams, they tend to have lower libido, so they're less inclined to seek out ewes to mate if rams are thin at turnout.
Look, you touched on something there already, and it's something you're very conscious before mating, but certainly during the mating period with rams. The risk of a rise in temperature, or ram going infertile, or even sometimes lameness, a physical injury that'll reduce their libido or their ability to mate ewes. Dealing with them things promptly, Damian, or maybe removing them if needs be, should that be something we're a bit more vigilant about?
Well, absolutely, yeah. And again, I suppose in the lead up to mating, I suppose sperm production in the ram, it takes probably in the region of 5 to 7 weeks. So what that in effect means is that a ram that's mating a ewe around now, mid-October, they would have started producing that sperm probably the end of August, the start of September. So anything that interferes with sperm production in the run up to mating can have disastrous effects really on the ram's ability to impregnate ewes. So again, that's why we always talk about having replacement rams bought in time, and that you can observe closely these rams in the 6 to 8 week period prior to turnout. Like as you said there, any infection that the ram picks up that causes an increase in body temperature of as little as a half a degree Celsius for 24 hours, this can render the ram temporarily infertile. So it's important, as you say, to not alone observe the rams in the run-up to mating, but also to keep a close eye on them during the mating season, so that if a ram needs to be treated or replaced, that you can do that fairly promptly.
Just like in terms of monitoring, like someone that's obviously, look, the physical injury, something like that, the lame ram, that's easy enough to see and deal with. What I'm just thinking here, like in terms of that kind of subfertile, infertile ram, that's not always going to be easy to detect, and it's particularly high risk for those in single sire mating. We might touch on that in a moment, but Damon, we've talked about raddling rams and why it's important for years, but maybe just take us through it again in that context. Like, it has more benefits than just detecting subfertile or infertile rams.
Absolutely. Look, I think raddling of rams, it's an absolutely essential task for all sheep farmers, really. And as you say, you can keep an eye on how mating is proceeding, and I would urge farmers not to skip this very important task. And even some people, if they're running rams in groups as opposed to the single sire mating, as you say, they maybe feel that they're okay, that they don't need to raddle. But I would still say that in all cases, we'd be recommending raddling. And again, just as you say, to recap, most people, this will be old hat to a lot of people, but you start with lighter colours. You'd use a lighter colour first so that it can be overmarked as time goes on with the darker colour if that arises. So example of that would be, starting with the likes of yellow, followed by the likes of orange, maybe green, maybe red, maybe blue, maybe black. Probably won't need all those colours. And again, I suppose changing the colour at least every 14 days, so that you've changed the colour before, we'll say, a second cycle or a repeat yoke comes about. So if a lot of ewes start repeating after the first cycle, you can fairly suspect that there may be a problem with a ram. So when you've raddled, there is still time to do something about it. And look, it's a lot better than finding out at scanning time that you have a lot of empty ewes on your hands.
In reality, most ewes will tip within that first cycle. So it's the first and second week. If you did want to do much dividing, you're going to get most benefit. Then it's early versus late. But I suppose, Damien, that other benefit, like, you're kind of future-proofing yourself a wee bit for winter nutrition if you do have a good idea when the expected lambing date is.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a lot of flocks, I mentioned there, we'll say about changing the colour every 14 days. A lot of flocks will do it more frequently, particularly in the early stages of mating. So people might go every 7 days, every week with a change of colour. And what this does, I suppose, it's a very good predictor of the expected lambing date. So this enables the ewes to be grouped together at housing time by expected lambing date. So grouping the ewes, you'd be grouping the ewes by expected lambing date, and you'd be also grouping them probably by scanned litter size. And this allows for far more accurate concentrate feeding in the run-up to lambing. So firstly, I suppose there's potential to reduce the amount of concentrate feeding, so that in turn reduces costs. But probably equally important, it would also optimize the lamb birth weight. So it will reduce the incidence of having oversized lambs due to maybe ewes being on a fairly high plane of nutrition over a longer period, because you're not quite sure when they're due to lamb if you haven't done the raddling properly. So it has the potential to reduce lambing difficulty, which in turn will reduce lamb mortality.
Might give a bit of indication too what the workload is going to be like come lambing time. But
well, exactly, it gives you an idea of your lambing spread. Exactly, yeah.
We mentioned there, like, there's two predominant different types of raddle, but if we deal with the kind of the paste or the powder we're going to mix up first, Damien, you might just take us through that process.
Yeah, again, it's still a very popular with people that they buy the raddle powder and mix it with some sort of maybe a vegetable oil or something like that. The aim really, I suppose, is to make sort of a nice thick paste rather than a sort of a runny material. So you add small amounts of oil at a time and work it into the powder until you've got a fairly thick consistency of a paste. And then you apply this liberally to the area of wool that's just in front of the brisket of the ram. So, and it's important that you kind of work that well into the wool. You can sort of knead it in well. And again, this needs to be reapplied probably every few days, every 3 or 4 days maybe, and especially during the first few weeks when the rams are quite busy. So it'll be wearing off them fairly quick. Some people, I suppose, use other, maybe rub the raddle that you use, or the crayon that you use on a raddle harness. Some people actually use that and just rub that onto the same area, the wool area just in front of the brisket. But again, I'd say that mightn't last as long. It might probably need to be reapplied more regularly than the actual raddle paste.
Like, again, the amount of it's going on, you'll see it getting a bit later. It'll be the best indication whether it needs to be topped up or not.
Well, that's it. If you'll be observing your ewes each day, and if you see a ewe being mated, you'll have a fair idea that the raddle is getting light, so that it needs to be topped up. Yeah.
So, like, the other main form you touched on it there is the harness, and some are very fond of that particular type, others not so much. What's a couple of key criteria for it, Damian?
Yeah, again, as you described there, Ciarán, it's just as the name suggests, it's fitted onto the ram harness, and there's a crayon block that's attached to this harness. So again, the crayon block can be replaced when you're changing colours. It's also important, I suppose, when you put on this harness first, that you check it every day. It's not a matter of sticking it on and letting them off for the 2 weeks or whatever. You need to keep an eye on the harness, that it stays in place. They tend to be a bit stretchy and that, so after a few days on, they can stretch a little bit. They can also bed into the wool of the ram. We also mentioned, I suppose, that the ram over the mating season will be losing a little bit of body condition. So really what you're trying to guard against is you need to adjust it and tighten it a little bit if necessary in order to keep it in place. What you really want to avoid, I suppose, is that if it slips back on the ram, and it can potentially be impede him from actually mating ewes. So that's the last thing you need, is a harness that's stopping him from mating ewes. So just to, I suppose, they're very useful, and a lot of people are very fond of them, but just they need to be watched, particularly for the first week or two they're on.
I suppose maybe just with the crayon or the harness be very important to ensure there's no damage on the brisket as well on a ram.
Exactly. Yeah, you just to check that there's no sores or anything like that there as a result of it as well. Yeah.
Look at, I suppose, something else we just mentioned briefly a moment ago was the whole thing of single sire mating, group mating. Look, oftentimes, particularly for those maybe producing their own replacements, or certainly more pedigree flocks or hill flocks, we'd see a bit of single sire mating going on where they want to identify the parent of the lambs. Look, it has a lot of advantages from that point of view, but there are risks associated with it too. Minimizing that risk of an infertile or subfertile ram, particularly if you're single sire mating, any couple of tips on that here, Damian?
Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned there, I suppose, particularly maybe in bigger flocks, so some people may let out a sort of a team of rams to a group of ewes, and I suppose in some ways this can help ensure against the ram, if there's a ram in the team that may be infertile or subfertile. But I mean, look, there are risks associated with that as well. Sometimes if people just let out 2 rams as a team out to a group of ewes, there generally will be one dominant ram who will be trying to mate all the ewes and maybe blocking the other ram from mating. If that dominant ram happens to be infertile or subfertile, you can have a problem. So I suppose what we'd be saying is, if you're letting out a team of rams, ideally use 3 or more rams together per group of ewes, and this eliminates the effect of the blocker ram. the other thing, I suppose,
you're giving yourself that bit of cover. It's a simple kind of change to do.
Exactly, yeah. And the other thing, I suppose, maybe with teams of rams or groups of rams, it's probably best not to mix mature rams and ram lambs if possible, because the mature rams again will tend to be dominant. And as you mentioned then, Ciarán, with single sire mating, this is obviously one ram per group, and it's particularly important, we say, for smaller flocks, and also pedigree flocks, or flocks that are doing some level of recording where they need to know the parentage of the lambs. It's all the more important in this situation, I suppose, to raddle your rams. And with one ram per group, it's a good idea, where possible, to rotate the rams between groups before the start of the next cycle. So you'd probably be rotating after 14 days, maybe the same time as you'd be changing raddle colour, so that you move a ram to a different group of sheep. You rotate the rams around that way. Would be one way of guarding, I suppose, against infertility or subfertility in any individual ram.
I suppose, practically speaking, Damian, at that stage, like, the vast majority of the ewes are tipped, and even collapsing in groups, in the bigger groups, from a point of view of grazing out or grass management at that stage of the year, as the season progresses, it probably has a lot of benefits as well.
Absolutely, and I mean, as you say, there are flocks that are maybe successfully getting up to 90% in lamb to first service, like so. You're for the repeats, everything going well with your rams, you're not talking about as big a number of you're talking about a relatively small number of ewes to be mated at that stage. So, as you say, you can join groups and maybe get around it that way as well.
Yeah, look, it's a couple of simple steps. You're just basically putting a bit of insurance there that if there is an infertile one, it's minimal risk. Look, in terms of ewe to ram ratio, look, we have a couple of standard figures I'm sure we'll throw out in this one, but there is some variation out there in the industry in what breeders expect the rams, what rams are capable of doing, and look, we know there's certainly a bit of difference between different breeds as well. Just maybe, Damian, take us through the guideline figures on it, and we might tease that a little bit more.
For sure. Again, it's a common question, Ciarán, and I suppose a good ballpark figure, I suppose, for a mature ram, with about 45 ewes would be a good ballpark figure. And as you say, there is evidence that certain breeds where rams tend to be more active and that kind of thing, they can successfully mate up to 70 ewes per one ram. But I mean, if you're looking for a figure, we'd be sort of saying a ewe to ram ratio of about 1 ram to 45 ewes in terms of a mature ram. Now, a ram lamb, I suppose, is a different story. It hasn't reached full maturity, obviously, yet. So in terms of a ram lamb, the figure we'll be talking about would be letting a ram lamb out with about 25 ewes. And again, I suppose there are cases, particularly, as I say, with the more active ram breeds, where a ram lamb can successfully mate up to 40 ewes. But again, the figure would be about the 1 to 25 as such.
So it's important to consider where ram lamb is still growing and developing, to maybe not overdoing for prolonged periods. Maybe.
Well, exactly. And again, as you mentioned earlier on, I suppose about grouping up groups, and maybe reducing the number of rams that are out there. You could maybe pull away the ram lambs at that stage and use a mature ram to do the mopping up in the later stages of the mating season.
Like, just the one other thing there, look, we talk about grouping up and moving around different groups and ewes. That whole idea of handling them during it, we mentioned that the big routine tasks, the dose and otherwise should be left off, but maybe carrying out some routine tasks like with the brought in to be rattled, or maybe a quick pass through a foot bath or that. How big an issue, Damian, do you think that is during the mating period, or if they're used to it, is it a minimal enough risk?
Look, it is a minimal enough risk. As I said at the start, you'd be trying to have the major tasks done, but from once due care is taken in terms of the flocking of them, we certainly wouldn't be advocating running them around the field a couple of times with the dog or anything like that. But from once they're taken in a reasonably relaxed fashion, for want of a better word, I suppose, and that you carry out the tasks with sort of minimum disturbance, I don't see it as a major issue, Ciarán.
Just the one other group, I suppose, that will be going to the ram, and they're probably more towards the end of the month and even into November, is ewe lambs. Just checking again where they are in terms of target weight, and maybe we mentioned this in the earlier podcast, with the risk of maybe joining some very light ewe lambs. Just again, the guideline figures on that one, Damian.
Yeah, again, look at the guideline we would say is that your lambs at joining should be at least, and it's a sort of a minimum figure, I suppose, if you like, at least 60% of their expected mature body weight. And the stronger the better in some ways. So if you take a flock of ewes, or if your expected mature weight, say for these type of ewes, is 80 kilograms, for example, the ewe lambs at joining should be a minimum maybe of 48 to 50 kilograms and upwards at mating. So, as I say, it's probably important that you're monitoring these. As you said, they'll be probably going to the ram maybe later in the month. It's important that you're monitoring these lambs, and if there are lambs within the group that are not making the grade, it's probably better to pull them out and leave them run dry over the winter period instead. The other point, I suppose, about breeding ewe lambs, again, it would be I would be advising using a mature ram with the ewe lambs, as they'll be far better at seeking. They'll be far better than a ram lamb at seeking out ewes to mate. And obviously, then you're choosing a ram that's known for ease of lambing. So you're choosing a suitable ram and a suitable ram breed as well.
Maybe Damien, just if we can finish up with a couple of take-home points for producers for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, again, as we said at the start, try and carry out the routine tasks pre-mating so that you can minimum disturbance to the flock during mating. But as we mentioned earlier, it's important that you continue to observe both the ewes and the rams for lameness and other issues. And look, if they have to be treated, that's fine. Go ahead and treat them. But as we mentioned, with kind of due care and with minimum disturbance. And I think the key take-home message, Ciarán, is raddle your rams. I think it's absolutely essential. Don't skip this really important task. Do it properly, and I suppose stick with it for the entirety of the mating season. Really, change the colour at least every 14 days so that you can pick up any ram fertility issues. And also, it's an excellent predictor of expected lambing date, and this can be a huge help to you next spring when you're planning your pre-lambing feeding regime.
Damian, plenty to consider. Thanks very much for giving your time.
No problem, Ciarán. My pleasure.
Okay, plenty of points to consider there from Damian and some very useful practical advice. Again, highlighting the importance then of raddling. It's a very simple management task. It does take a little bit of time and effort now, but the benefits, both immediate in terms of identifying the infertile ram, and also for later during that late pregnancy period, so we can actually adequately and more accurately feed our sheep correctly. It's one of the very useful tasks. That's it for me. Again, for any updates from the sheep program, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in to all our episodes.